All right, so today we're diving into a text that is, let's be honest, both incredibly detailed and deeply strange. It's called The Law of One, or sometimes the Ra Material. We're going to unpack the whole story, from its roots in some pretty serious UFO research, all the way to the cosmic philosophy it lays out. Let's get right into it. Now, you'd think a story like this would start with some kind of mystical vision, right? But nope, it starts with this claim. A claim of pure scientific inquiry. The guy at the center of it all, Don Elkins, he was a physicist, a professor, and he came at this whole thing not as a believer, but as a scientist trying to solve a puzzle that just seemed impossible. And this wasn't just some weekend hobby. We're talking about a quest that lasted for nearly 30 years. Don Elkins and his research partner, Carla L. Ruckert, were just relentless. They went deep into paranormal phenomena, UFOs, and the very fabric of consciousness itself. Their journey was a slow burn, a really long, patient process. For almost 2 decades, they were just refining their methods, trying to experiment with telepathic contact. But then, in 1981, everything changed. I mean, dramatically. The information they started getting was just different. The quality, the depth, the precision, it was a total game changer. This was the real start of what we now know as the Ra Material. So their research took them into this world of just bizarre, unexplainable stuff. They were actually guided by an idea from the famous ufologist Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who talked about the high strangeness factor. The basic idea was, counterintuitively, that the weirder a case was, the more likely it was to actually be real. So what does this high strangeness actually look like in practice? Well, one of the biggest and most common pieces of the puzzle they kept finding was this weird pairing. Someone sees a UFO, and then they realize there's a chunk of time they just can't account for. And a pattern started to show up, a really clear one. Witnesses would see a craft, feel this weird compulsion to just stare at it, and only later would they look at a clock and realize time was just gone. In one case, 38 minutes just vanished. And almost every time, it was only under hypnosis that the full story came out, being taken onto a craft and examined by beings that were not human, sometimes even described as machine-like. But hold on, because the weirdness didn't stop in the sky. The researchers started documenting something that was, frankly, even more startling, a direct link between seeing a UFO and then suddenly being able to affect physical stuff with your mind, the phenomenon we call psychokinesis. I mean, picture this. A 14-year-old kid sees a bright light in the sky, and the next thing you know, he can bend a fork almost in half just by talking to it. And this wasn't just stories. Scientists like Professor John Taylor took this stuff seriously. They studied kids who could bend metal objects that were sealed inside glass tubes, which suggested a kind of physics where your consciousness could actually influence the world around you. Okay, and this is where it all comes together. For Don Elkins, the physicist, these weren't just a bunch of random, weird events. They were clues. They were puzzle pieces, and he believed they were all pointing toward a totally new, unified way of understanding reality, a new physics that could explain everything. He was wrestling with these huge questions. The same kind of stuff Einstein was chasing with his unified field theory. How can these ships just appear and disappear? How can a thought bend a spoon? He was convinced there had to be a single, underlying rule that connected it all. And what's so wild is that the telepathic information they'd been collecting for years kept pointing to the same thing. Our science was incomplete. The messages they got consistently said we didn't understand dimensions, that light doesn't really move, but that it simply is, and that all of creation is, at its heart, simple and totally unified. So, after this 30-year hunt for a new physics, it finally happened. In 1981, they made the contact they've been working towards. The source identified itself as Ra, and it delivered this core philosophy that it claimed was the answer to all of their questions. And here it is, the big one, the central idea that everything else is built on, the law of one. The text is very clear. All the separation we see and feel is an illusion. You're not just a piece of the universe. You are the universe, having an experience. And this isn't presented as just some nice, feel-good philosophy. According to the Ra Material, this idea of unity is the fundamental operating law of all of creation. It's saying that everything, a rock, a star, you, me, is all just an expression of a single, intelligent, conscious being. Okay, so if everything is one, then what's the point of all this? The separation we feel? Well, from that one single law, the material branches out into this huge cosmic framework for how we evolve. And it all centers on one fundamental choice. The material basically describes two evolutionary highways going in opposite directions. There's the positive path, which is called service to others. It's all about recognizing that unity in everything and expressing it through love and compassion. Then there's the negative path, service to self, which is about using the illusion of separation to gain power and control over others. Ra says both paths eventually lead back to the source, but they couldn't be more different in how they get there. So how does this evolution actually work? Well, the journey happens through what the text calls densities of consciousness. You can just think of them like grades in a cosmic school. It starts super simple with the basic awareness of minerals in the first density. Then you have the growth of plants and animals in the second. And that leads to right where we are now, third density. This is the big one, the level of self-awareness where we have to make that fundamental choice between the two paths. So why is this a big deal for us right now? Well, according to the text, our planet is at the very, very end of a 75,000-year cycle in this third density. And this whole cycle ends in something called a harvest, which is basically a graduation, where people who have clearly chosen a path get to move on to the next level of experience. And right here is where this huge cosmic story gets really, really personal. The material introduces this special group of souls that it says are on Earth right now for a very specific purpose. The text makes this pretty wild claim. A whole lot of people on Earth right now aren't actually from Earth. They didn't evolve through this planet's cycles of first, second, and third density. They are, in a sense, visitors. These souls are called wanderers, and the story goes they're basically beings from more advanced densities who volunteered to be born here, on a planet they knew would be confusing and difficult. And their mission? To help with this big planetary transition, this harvest, just by being here. The idea is that their very presence helps raise the collective consciousness of the planet. And the number Ra gives for how many of these wanderers were here on Earth back in 1981, it's just staggering. Approximately 65 million. But this mission is incredibly risky. Because when they're born into our third density, they go through this process of forgetting. I mean, poof, the memory of who they are and why they came is gone. The big danger is that they get totally caught up in the confusion and the drama of this reality and completely forget what they came here to do. So we go from this scientific search for a new physics all the way to this deep philosophy of cosmic unity and purpose. The Law of One really presents this challenging view that our whole lives are a kind of constructed illusion designed for learning and for making a choice. And that leaves us with one final, really personal question to think about.